Okay, hello everybody. I'm Tom Sherrington, and this is
David Didau.
yes, the one and only. And
The
David,
one and only. Hard to pronounce.
yeah, the one, yeah,
I've mastered it.
David Didau.
Although I do occasionally meet people who go, that's not how you pronounce your name. And
Well, they should know. They should know.
yeah, they do. They
They
do.
do.
I
So we had
think
a
someone on the internet somewhere has put a pronunciation guide.
have they
Yeah.
Didau?
Like,
Okay,
yeah, yeah,
I'm sure.
yeah.
And the reason we've gathered on this podcast
Sorry.
is to talk about David's name. In fact, we met at the research ed in New York, which is quite glamorous, and it was
Well, we
actually.
had met before.
I know, but we met recently and we were talking about stuff. And then after that, soon after,
Yeah.
um, we had an exchange on Twitter about, or X, about,
I can't be saying X.
no, okay, we'll say Twitter then.
Yeah, let's do that.
Now, let's make a list. Die down, Twitter.
Yeah, yeah. Anything
About,
that is likely to annoy Musk is a good thing, isn't it?
okay. About what happens when children, students talk to each other in lessons and how you organize that and what you call it and what the different things mean. And um, for example, turn and talk, think, pair, share, and what
Yeah.
the value of this? What's the value of getting students talking to each other, and therefore, how do you organize it? So I don't know. It started off because I have this blog, which is,
You
getting,
wrote a very good blog,
yeah,
which I think you thought I was being a bit sniffy about. And I wasn't. You wrote a very good blog about how to improve paired discussions,
yeah,
and there were lots of really good ideas in there. And I read it, and I enjoyed it. And what I thought was, and it was an interesting reflection. I thought as I was reading it was that I was trying to work out why I wouldn't do the things
mm,
that you were talking about, and like I was just sort of there was an instinctive like, oh, I don't do that, I wouldn't do that.
yeah. I mean,
And I was trying to work out what it was that was driving that response. And anyway, we disagreed agreeably.
I think so. Well, I mean, I think I'll give you a couple of examples. So, for example, we when I do my training and I go to schools and talk about this, I promote a technique which is called think, pair, share, which other people tell me was invented by someone in 1981 who I never heard of, but I know the technique. I must have been told about it. And I was trained on a specific version of it, and then that and a core part of it is that you set a question which has got a bit of structure to it, so you can't just come up with one word answer or anything. It has to have like a bit of these three reasons because or something, or on the one hand, but on the other hand, something with a bit of structure, and then the students have to think about it. They have to think of their own answer, share theirs with their partner, take in turns, and kind of combine their answers in some form, and then be ready to share it with the teacher if they call them to share it to the whole group. And that's the kind of
Yeah.
like. So I
And
gave a couple of examples.
that was just in the water, bubbling around for, like years ago.
Yeah,
Every teacher got told it was a good thing. And it is a good thing, but I think you've seen it done pretty badly. I know I
I
have.
have. I've done it. Interestingly, I mean, I've done it. I've seen it done badly. I've seen it done also with what I'd call a lack of precision. So not
Mm.
everyone benefits from it. So it's kind of nearly there, but they just need to make it more precise.
Right.
My questions are the ones that you were sort of saying you wouldn't use were all taken from lessons I've seen or done, mainly seen, which I thought worked really well.
Mm.
And for example, one of them was a year five lesson where they were talking about like a bit of evaluation of competing arguments about. I mean, the case
Was this the street art one?
that well, no, that was another one. This was one about
Oh, okay.
Snowdon, and it's year five. They're talking about environmental impact of lots of people climbing Snowdon, and and the council they'd had some stimulus where the council was saying we're going to charge people, and they had to come up with an argument. On one hand, it's fair to charge people, but on the other hand, it's not. And the teachers used think, pair, share in a few loop rounds. And I was looking around and thinking, isn't this amazing to me? Every single child is saying things like, in my opinion, and on one
Mm.
hand, but on the other hand, um, firstly, I think it's the good reason. Secondly, and finally, she had all these structures in
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
And they're all, I was listening to them all, and then she said, okay, partner B, swap over, make sure partner A, you now
Mm.
share yours. And so everyone was talking, everyone practicing. And I thought, this is good. This is a good
Yeah.
example. But it's very structured, and it wasn't like a casual, hey guys, have a chat about this, you know.
And she'd obviously trained the class up in doing
Yeah,
that.
they knew about it. They knew what
Yeah,
to
yeah,
do. They knew the routines.
yeah,
So I mean, but those were the questions that
yeah.
made
And
that.
obviously, I'm not saying for a moment that that's not a good thing. Um,
Yeah.
it was more the fact that as I said, I was reflecting and thinking, why wouldn't I do it like that? What would you know? And so I've arrived at a rationale for that. If
Yeah,
you
go for it. Now what? So what's the reason?
yeah, so when I get kids to talk to each other, um, I I almost without fail, it's because I'm trying to work out whether or not they understand what's been taught.
Hmm.
And sometimes I'm picking up feedback from individual work or responses to whole class discussion that there are some students in the room that aren't getting it. Sometimes I just want to check, like I've dumped something a bit weighty and I want to make sure that it's sunk in. And so if I get them to talk about it, the reason is to give them an well, twofold. One, to give everybody an opportunity to say what they think. And also for me to be able to sense check and to be able to think, are they, do they, is their understanding close to what I think it should be? And then recalibrate based on that. But I do think traditional think pair share as well, and I do think it's the way I would set it up, and I like you, I would really try and codify it. So for me, the think bit was always the bit that was skipped when back in the day, and when
Yeah.
watching other, they just go. But basically, think pair share meant quick paired discussion.
Yeah.
And so the think bit, I would always get children to do individually on a mini whiteboard. So I'd get them to, write an idea to help prevent them getting to the pair bit and then going, oh, no, I've got nothing. So they're in a set time period. They're writing something on their mini whiteboard, and I'm circulating around the room. And if there is somebody who's written nothing, then I'll see it and I'll say, what about this? What about that? Whatever it is, and get them started. And then when they're then in their paired discussion, I'm already reasonably confident that they've both got something to say. But I might also do something like give different people slightly different prompts. So I might say, okay, so like number one in the pair, the question you're going to be answering is how did this? And then number two in the pair, you're going to be answering the question, why did this happen? And so they're both answering slightly different connected questions. I've seen this done in primary schools where they call it blue and green talk partners for no reason, as far as I can tell. I don't think blue and green's entirely arbitrary, but I quite like it. Um, and uh, and then they're not just going to be repeating each other because hopefully they're going in with different things to build on what the other person said. And I'd also say to them, I'm going to be asking you to feedback what you've heard, not what you've said.
Oh, nice. I like that. That's good.
That's nice, isn't it? And so that really kind of signals
They
I'm
have to
valuing
listen
the
to each
listening.
other. So
Yeah,
that sounds to me like that would be. So the question I had for you was
yeah.
okay, so although you were thinking I wouldn't use those questions, um, what sorts of questions would you ask then that work well within that structure?
So I'm much more likely to do it on the fly.
Right.
So in response to what I've just taught. So let's say I don't know, I was I'm just thinking of maybe I'd been teaching year 11 Macbeth lesson and getting them to think about I don't know the great chain of being and how Shakespeare's potentially asking us to think about what happens when the natural order is disrupted, as it is in the play. And I've taught them something about that, and then I want to make sure that they've understood it. So I might ask them something as simple and straightforward as what's the great chain of being, and give them that moment to sort of jot down what they think it is, and then that would lead to quite a quick
Yeah.
paired discussion where they're going, I think it's this, I think it's that. Okay, back. Or it might be, I want something a bit more developed. I want them leading up to something, like keeping with the same example. I might say, okay, so I want person one in the pair to talk about instances in the play where they think the great chain of being is disrupted, and I want person two to think about why Shakespeare might have thought that was an interesting and important thing to say to an audience at the time. And then that's obviously based on teaching that I've done, so they're both coming in with that, and they're having a paired discussion about those
And so
ideas.
they've got knowledge, and the fact
Yeah,
you're not asking them to,
right. That's crucial.
you're not asking to sort of like invent stuff they've never heard. And
No,
it's
no, no,
consolidatory quite strongly.
no. As a rule, as a general rule, a rule of thumb, I hardly ever ask questions in a class that I've not previously taught the answer to in that lesson.
That's interesting. Because what I found is interesting is when, for example, like you could, I can imagine you doing that really spontaneously. And what I found in some of the work that I've done is that teachers are just really like it's surprising in a way, but it's just true that some teachers find this thing of getting everyone talking not it's not they're not natural with
Yeah,
it. They don't have the routine. So I'll give you an example. Like this is the
yeah.
one I often cite when I'm doing training because I've got several examples. Oh my God! But there's when you sit at the back and you watch what the children actually say. It was when it
It's
was
fascinating, isn't it?
about art versus vandalism, and it was a brilliant unit. I thought it was a great unit. I saw all the materials.
Yeah, I read the thing that you said about that. Yeah,
One of the teachers just had said something like, "Okay, guys, have a quick chat. What do you think?" And it was just so open. And she hadn't layered it up with the vocabulary or the different themes they might explore. Or, for
mm.
example, you might say that she hadn't modeled any type of depth of answer. So they were literally going, "Well, I think it's art. Um, well, I don't. I think it's vandalism." They literally
Yeah,
just kept repeating themselves. And it
yeah,
was
yeah.
quite funny. And then they stopped because they weren't
They
moving
ran out of stuff.
stuff to argue. They didn't even make a case, either of these boys. And I always make this fairly picky point, which is important, that even if everyone else was having a great conversation, those two weren't. So it didn't
No.
work for everyone. So it's not enough. You have to be much more confident everyone's doing it.
Yes.
But the head of department, who was, she was, we could see this, and it was the intention had been different. So it's that type of thing where you think, don't just let it be a kind of casual chat. And the other very common
Can
thing
I can
is
I ask a question?
yeah,
What was the teacher doing while the children were talking?
she was listening to one particular group. So,
Oh
and I
yeah,
see that quite common. Like the teacher just
yeah,
thinks, okay, I'm going to be interested in a couple. But
yeah,
as soon as you kneel down to interest in
yeah.
those guys, you're not really tracking the others. And so she wasn't
No,
really thinking. She was prompting and supporting a couple of
yeah,
students in their discussion, which is a very common response.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
And
hard. It's really hard.
it is hard. Another
And
example is the structure of it being pairs, and again, a lot of another corner people cut is, okay, guys, have a quick chat. They'll just say, all right. They might even say, turn to your partner, but they don't have partners other than groups of four or three.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was watching this
It's
really.
always annoying when there's the one odd kid, the odd one out.
I watched this with I mean, a lesson. It was a primary lesson they were doing. They'd done this talk for writing thing, and it was really dramatic. I was really into it. So were they, like, really excited. But then you had to come up with a bit of vocab in pairs. And there was one group of three right in front of me, and one of the girls was very shy. And she basically, it was around, I think it was the only three. I checked around the room, and she was like watching a tennis match, listening to the other two, batting their ideas enthusiastically. And she didn't say a single thing the entire time. And again, I was thinking, it just doesn't work. So everyone's meant to practice, but she didn't get to practice. And so the teacher was sort of thinking, yeah, I know, I put her on
Yeah.
that group because I thought it would be like moral support.
Mm.
Actually, it wasn't. It was exclusionary because she didn't get a chance to say anything.
I mean, arguably, she did get some benefit from that,
Yeah, she
depending
might
on
have
what
done.
she listened to. I don't know. And I think that then takes you back to why are people doing think, pair, share, or talk partners, or turn and talk, or whatever you're calling it. And I think my worry I think worry is probably too strong, but I think what I tend to find is that teachers are feel a pressure to like do oracy.
Yeah.
And I'll say, I'll sometimes say to them, why did you choose that activity? And they'll say, it was oracy.
No, that's a terrible answer.
Well, I mean, it is a terrible answer, but it tells you something about the system that they're in, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
So
Well,
the
but those are
system in
some
their school, but
examples.
also the wider system, because I think there are, ever since Keir Starmer said, I think this is a really important thing. We've all been thinking about it a bit more, perhaps a bit differently.
And some people kick against it. Now, there are some teachers I
Yeah,
know and have met who will say, I never do talk partners, and for them, talking is sort of not is pointless, um, unless it's choral. Weirdly, they might do some choral stuff to practice
yeah,
vocal. But for me, I'm slightly in the camp of people who feel that talking matters for its own sake. Because let's say, for
right.
example, I'm a science teacher, so I think, um, let's say, for example, there's a light on here, and there's a switch over there, and a lot of people, like you should say to them, "No, why does the light come on when I press the switch? What's going on?" And to explain that, it sort of seems you sort of have an intuition for it. It's connected somehow. There's wires, but okay, but what's happening? And to have to kind of articulate that with language, not in a test or on a question
Mm.
or writing it, just talking it through and like trying to work out the order. I think talking through ideas is really powerful and then having to sequence them. And so I'm
Well,
a big fan of that, of getting students to have to try to explain things verbally. And then, of
yeah.
course, they have to do it to somebody. So doing it in pairs works really well.
So if they have already got some ideas about how electricity works,
Yeah.
I can see that being productive. But if they haven't,
No, it
if
would be
it
pointless.
becomes a kind of just guess what you think's happening, and
Yeah, but
and
then,
I think that's
yeah.
why I say I would typically only ask children to talk about things that I've already taught them the the
Yeah,
the,
they should know
the
that
stuff
exactly. No,
for.
exactly. I might have just explained it. I might
Right.
have just said, "Here's loads of examples. Here's the video.
Yeah.
Here's the
Yeah.
diagrams." I might have spoken whatever and just said, "Okay,
Yeah.
now let's see. Does it make sense then?" So,
Yes.
let's say you had to explain it to your mom or your younger brother. Now, what would you say? Now, why does it
Yeah.
work? Okay, like let me organize my thoughts. But it's the value of the talking. It's the talking itself is part of the learning, and it's part of consolidation or even revealing. Well, I do this with adults in a training. It's like you think you
Yeah.
understand this, don't you? But find out if you understand it truly by explaining it to someone, and they realize, oh gosh,
We are. Well,
I
you probably know about the illusion of explanatory depth.
know what is that?
Ah, okay. Well, so it's
Tell
the
that to me.
no, okay. Well, I'll come at you with this.
Come
So
on, hit
it's
me with it.
the fact that we intuitively think, we know things like how a bicycle works until somebody says, explain how a bicycle works. And you're like, well, you sort of sit on it and then you realize when you're trying to explain it that maybe you don't actually know what you thought you knew.
Yeah,
And it isn't until that point that that illusion is
yeah,
revealed
that's revealed
because
to
you
you.
can't explain what's going on. And I think that's really, really common. Like there's a lovely set of psychological experiments that are done where they ask subjects to draw a picture of a bicycle, and so that they don't conflate art skills with bike knowledge, they give them this pre-drawn bicycle frame, and they just say, put the chain and the pedals, add those onto the frame, and it really reveals like around about 70% of people do it incorrectly,
Wow.
typically. Yeah. I know, but they all know that the chain and the pedals are down there. Like nobody puts them on the handlebars or anything like mad.
Yeah,
But the way they draw them, it's clear that they're not sort of, they haven't linked them from the pedals to the gears to the back wheel. They're not. There is no logical connection with how they've drawn them, which reveals that they don't really get what's happening. And it turns out, unsurprisingly, that people who are routinely really, really good at this are sort of regular cyclists.
oh, really? You have
You
to
know,
change
and
that.
um, and anyone who maintains their own bike is obviously fantastic at it. But for a lot of adults, maybe they haven't ridden a bike since they were a kid, and they've got these vague, like, of course I know how a bike works.
Yeah, well,
Yes, I do.
so one of my favorite lessons I've seen where I thought talk was really powerful in revealing this stuff to the teacher, like how well have you understood it was, and there are other assessment tools. So I always think whenever you're talking about this stuff, it's never the only way. It's part of a whole set. Was they do in the water cycle? This is like year four, and they had taught it. I mean, why does it rain? This is something which you talk about in reception. It's raining. What's that come from? Water's falling out of the sky. That's not magic. So they grow, and the vocabulary is developing, and they've done this whole water cycle diagram. And as a way of checking, the teacher had, it's partly a retrieval practice, but it was all sorts of, using a pair structure. They had this, one of each pair was like a verifier,
Okay.
and just had their book open basically. And their partner had to say, okay, this is why it rains. And they had to kind of talk out.
And their partner's going, nope.
No, well, it was good. And I thought, hearing year four saying things like the water evaporates from the surface of the ocean. It's like, this is great. And they were practicing saying it. And it was
Yeah.
saying it with generating the word. I thought this was excellent. Like everyone has to do it. And
Yeah.
of course, the person who was the verifier in the first go was better the second time because
Yep.
they had
Yep.
But I thought this is how you get vocab being used rather than everyone sort of chorally chanting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think choral chanting has its place.
Yeah, it does. But it's not the only way. It's the free flow of having to make up the sentences yourself, which is the proper
Well,
test.
I mean, I think so. The red flag that goes up for me is, obviously it's great hearing kids saying the water's evaporated from the ocean, but what I'd immediately want to ask everybody in the room is, what does water evaporating from the ocean mean? And
Yeah, that's
my
true.
working hypothesis would be, depending on the age and stage of the students, like at least half of them probably wouldn't be able to tell me.
That's probably true as well. But I
And
think that's
so,
natural, though. I don't think I see
yeah,
that doesn't trouble me too much as a science teacher
okay. Well,
because
I think
I feel like electricity itself, electricity is totally baffling.
well, no, for sure, for sure. But I think that what happens, and the reason I bring it up is because I think that what's tempting for us as teachers is hearing children say the water's evaporating from the ocean and thinking, oh, they get it. But maybe it is indicative of that illusion of explanatory depth, and when you probe more carefully, they wouldn't be
Yeah.
able to explain that. And that's fair enough. But I think it's always better for a teacher to know what children do and don't know, and it's very, very easy to get false signals and therefore false ideas
Yeah.
about what your
It's,
students get and what they
it's
don't.
true. I mean, that's the subtle thing. I mean, I remember seeing. I mean, this is going. I think it is taught. This is where I remember supporting a science department in Birmingham, and one of the teachers was talking about this problem. Like the students seem to they got great GCSE grades, but they were not getting
Oh,
great A-level grades. And what's going
okay, that old chestnut. Yeah,
Well, it was a problem. It was about depth of understanding,
yeah,
rather versus kind of reproducing the knowledge. And at that level, it starts to make a real difference. So this student was telling me, year 12, was telling me about diffusion, the word diffusion. And she said, she kept on chanting. It means going from a high concentration to a low concentration. She said it over and over again. I was saying, no, I
yeah,
know that's true. But so, for example, here's a
yeah.
perfect bottle. I'll take the lid off. What happens to the molecules? Why do I smell them over here? How do they move? Can you explain the diffusion? And she couldn't have a clue what I was talking
No,
about. So
no,
the language, but then the test was through the fact that the reason I knew that is because she couldn't explain it verbally. I mean,
no.
it was a talk-based thing. So I feel like the talk has to be
Yeah.
designed to reveal the knowledge you're after at that moment.
Well, so okay, yeah, absolutely, and I think so that I think it can absolutely do that, and I think that one of the so I find it really, really useful for establishing, do the students understand the thing that I want them all to be able to understand? I'm going to do a sample of that, and I'm going to get some feedback about how close their understanding is to like my understanding, and then I'm going to make choices about what I do next. But where I where I get a bit more concerned is when, that thing you were saying earlier, where the students are trained to say things like firstly and therefore, and have all of these discourse markers integrated into their explanation. Is that what I tend to find is when I listen into those discussions, they use those things and they connect together everyday English instead of academic English. Do
Yeah,
you know
they
what I
can.
mean?
Yeah,
Do you
yeah, they
mean?
can do. Yeah, and that's the thing you have to watch out for. What
Yeah.
the levels of thinking and that what the
Right.
consequences are.
So, the for me, the danger of talk in the classroom is, obviously potentially you can have children spreading misconceptions and sort of, I think this wrong thing. Yeah, I think it too. Not checked. That's always a danger. But there's sensible things that teachers can do to guard against that. But what I think's more prevalent is that they it's an opportunity. There is opportunity in a lesson to help develop students' academic language, and it's really, really important that we do take those opportunities, because I think that if we want children to be academically successful, they need to be fluent in the language of academic success. And for many children, the only time they'll have any exposure to academic languages is in school, in classrooms. And then other children, obviously, they're very lucky; they get exposure to it elsewhere, and that's a massive asset. So I really want to take every opportunity I can in a lesson to develop students' academic language, and the only way I can do that in a way which is equitable, and that I can be more confident that all children are going to benefit from, is if I mediate that through whole class discussion, where I'm modeling and scaffolding their talk and getting them to repeat and
Mm.
practice using not just the key words but the structures, and integrate it all together, so that, and then really celebrate when, as a class, we've said something terrific, like, wow,
Yeah.
that sounds amazing, that's brilliant, let's write that down.
So in that context, I mean, are you saying things like? I mean, I've seen this done in all sorts of. I do always think like. I mean, this is where you have so much to communicate when you're trying to share an
Yeah,
idea.
yeah,
The good ideas, I think, a good ideas always have a subject context. They're always talking about the knowledge. There's not, and things like firstly, secondly, finally. It's just a trick to make them say three things. It's
yes,
rather than making them just go,
right,
it goes up, and they have to say it does this, this, and this, and it's sort of. I don't think in the examples I celebrate to myself, they're not
they're
three.
not tricks, no,
Firstly nonsense, secondly nonsense, and thirdly nonsense.
no, no,
They're just ways of helping the students form an answer which has depth. But then, of course, you do. I think this is an important point you made there. My favorite part of think, pair, share is the share at the
right,
end, and this is because this is
and
when
that's an art.
that's where you use the cold calling with hands up. You might just say, "Okay, so David, let's hear your idea," or "Here, let me. What did you think Johnny was saying?"
Yeah.
Brilliant. Fantastic. And then I would always say that what you should do is respond back to that. That's an interesting. And why did you say that? And there's always a bounce
Mm.
back. Fantastic. And then someone else. And was that the same as what David was saying? And how's that different from what David was saying?
Yeah,
Which of those
yeah,
arguments do you think is strongest? So that probing around
which
the pair share is also important.
those things are, they're potentially really, really great, and they have lots of depth potentially. They're also they're also massive time sinks.
You have to
They
be strategic about when you do
Yeah,
it.
you really, really do. So I would rarely ask that cold call question following a paired discussion without being fairly sure what I'm going to get back,
Mm,
because I've been circulating and maybe jotting down on
yeah.
my seating plan, like what a pair's been talking about. Oh, and I might sort of tap them on the shoulder and go, that's a nugget. That's I really want you to talk to everyone about that, and prepping the response as we go, so that when we get to that, I mean, obviously there are times when you get the it's lovely to watch sometimes, that, like, as in, I find it very funny in maybe a bit of a cruel way, probably, but when kids say that thing, and you can see the teacher's face sink, and they're like, oh Jesus. And they're like, and they say things like, yeah, and their voice says yes but their body says no, and it's a bit confusing. I think, there are really I think there are ways you have to tackle that, and the
Yeah.
way I use is very much copied from something that your mate John Tomsett told me about years ago, where I can't remember what he called it now. He had a name for it, but he just would draw a circle on the boards with a center, and he'd go, "That's the relation of your answer to the bullseye."
That's, I like it. Yeah. So
Yeah, it
that's
was great, and I use it a lot, and it really does work. And the kids, if they have given us like what they thought was a sensible answer, which is wrong, they're getting some accurate feedback about their version of reality and what's going on without, in a way where you can still say thank you for your contribution. I'm going to honor it by showing you the relationship between it and what we're
yeah,
talking about.
and the idea
But
is you get to a point with a class where you can be honest with them and you know them. You can say, yeah, or, you can challenge them because you know them enough to say that if they're wrong or they're off the right, or they've just gone off track, and there's a really good Teach Like a Champion video, actually, really like, where the teacher's saying, no, you're just saying something that's totally, you've not followed the argument. And they kind of really challenge the student and say, don't just say what was in your head, say, follow the reasoning of the previous speakers. And that's the whole thing. And you've got to keep it on track.
wow,
And
I mean,
that's what they wanted them to do.
yeah. I mean, one of the things I found over the last few years, and I've become obsessed with it, Tom, is that if teachers worry that children don't listen to them, they listen to each other far, far less. So the minute one student speaks, everyone has tacit permission to sack off for a bit.
Yeah.
And and you all have noticed that you sitting at the back of the room, I'm sure, like me, you'll turn to the kid next to you and go, "What did they just say?" And they'll go, "It wasn't
Yeah,
this."
exactly. They don't
And
always listen and they don't always hear it very well. They
well,
just,
there's that as well. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Sometimes kids will say, "I'm sorry, I just didn't hear what was going on." But I've become obsessed with it, and so one of the things that I now routinely do when I'm teaching, and I should caveat that when I say I'm teaching, I do kind of like weird fake teaching where I haven't got my own classes. I'm teaching other people's classes, and it's normally kids I've just met, so it's kind of like an interesting vibe. But so sometimes I'm trying to build the culture from scratch in
Yeah.
the same lesson. But one of the things that I'll do, especially when kids, I'll say to kids like, "What did she just say?" And the next, I don't know, wasn't listening. Okay, I really need you to listen. I'm going to go back to them, or I'm going to go to another student, and I'm going to ask them, and then I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to get you to tell me what's been said. And it completely gets rid of that kind of confrontational stuff because you're
Yeah.
like not having a go at them. You're just saying, "Oh, you just need to switch on now, and this is what I'm going to check."
Yeah.
And
Good.
so I do that, and then sometimes so the first time I do it with a class, like maybe they think, "Oh yeah, teachers say they're going to come back and they never do." So like I make a little asterisk on my seating plan to tell me I've got to go back to the kid. So they go to the new answer, and I come back and I go, "What did they just say?" And sometimes they go, "Oh, still wasn't listening." That kind of, because that happens. So again, it's like, okay, I'm gonna tell you what they said, and I'm gonna ask you to tell me you're gonna repeat what I said. So they said this. What did they say? And then at that point, it's very, very rarely happens, but at that point, it's like defiance, isn't it? And so you deal
It
with that,
is. Yeah.
appropriately. But the thing I find fascinating, and I've pushed this to the limit sometimes, where I've, done this real back and forth, and over the course of a lesson, what did he say? What did she say? Everyone's kind of, really quick fire. Everyone's really into it. Everyone really high success rate. Everyone's loving it. And then, like the 19th person who has to repeat something, it says, "I don't know, I wasn't listening." It's like, wow.
I know, unbelievable. They just have totally checked out.
I
But I
would not have bet money on that before I started being obsessed with it.
No, it's so interesting, and I think we should. I often say this about like when teachers. It makes me laugh now when I hear it. When a teacher says when they get express frustration that children have forgotten stuff. You just think,
Yeah.
just give yourself a break. Just say, look, it was only yesterday, or it was only 10 minutes ago, and you've probably forgotten what I said. So here it is again. Or let me just
Yeah, yeah. It's normal.
anticipate the almost certainty that some of you have forgotten, rather than going, I can't believe you've forgotten it.
Right.
But here's
So,
a
I mean, one of the things that Oliver always talks about is the transience of
Oh
talk, isn't
yeah, I mean, oh my God, you see it, and people say,
it? Yeah.
"How does this compare the last example?" Well, that's on the slide you just clicked past. I can't see it, so I've forgotten it, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
gone. But here's a thing I wanted to say in this was about my concern. This is why I guess
Yeah.
I think I like to promote think, pair, share, and say
And
do it.
you've been doing it for years.
I have, and say do it
What
well.
did
So
you call it? Like the magic thing, or I can't
the
remember.
washing hands of learning.
Washing hands.
Because if you wash your hands every day,
Yeah, yeah,
you know you stay in a hospital, you stay
yeah,
healthier than if you don't.
yeah,
And
yeah,
like
yeah.
talk, think, pair,
And
share.
yet doctors don't always do it.
I don't.
Yeah,
But it's this thing of creating a space to rehearse your answers
yeah,
and all that kind of stuff. There's lots of benefits, but then I think I'm on the thing where I see it in lessons, and I talk about it endlessly every time we go to a school, is to do it better and better and with more precision,
yeah,
more definite thinking time. But it's always knowing, and it's always linked to things like sometimes you show me boards, sometimes you
yeah.
do cold calling, sometimes you just circulate and check and see what they're producing, all that. And it's in that mix. But there are two things what trouble me. One of them is when teachers think they're big on oracy and they love it, but what they're doing is sort of sitting. I always caricature them as sitting cross-legged on the front desk,
Yeah.
vibing it with the students and thinking, "I love discourse," but from what you see at the back of the class,
There's 7 kids taking part.
exactly, and they're well into it, and the teacher's
Mm.
full of
A
this.
levels often like that. Do you find?
Yeah, I do exactly. And
Yeah,
if they're running some sort of A-level type class and it's year eight, you think, no, 20 students in this room are not involved in this
yeah,
discussion.
yeah, yeah,
You're teaching the seven like they're your little mini
yeah,
A-level group, and they're not. You have to be more disciplined. So that's
yeah.
one group. The other group are people who are so like overwhelmed by the need for structure in the pair share or whatever, they don't bother at all. They just,
Uh,
the children barely speak in lessons at all. So it's all like, it might be show me boards and cold calling,
yeah, yeah.
but there's no extended talking. So
No,
in science, for
and
example, or geography or history even,
yeah.
students never have to make an argument or string a sentence together. It's always atomized bits of fact and then
Well,
an
they probably have to
argument.
write an argument, do they?
Sometimes, but you don't have to write sentences in science exams. You just write. Honestly, it's
Yeah, yeah,
terrible.
yeah.
It's
Well,
edit
that's, I mean,
bullet
there's an
points and
interesting
one word answer.
discussion there, isn't there,
Yeah,
about how science is assessed. I've
yeah,
got a mate who's a professor of biology at Bristol University, and he's not saying anything novel, but he talks about the fact that students that come to do biology degrees can't articulate arguments, and and that's something that he spends time trying to train them in how to do.
yeah.
And it is interesting that science, and I often get that from science teachers if I'm working with a school, and they'll go, "Yeah, but bullet points, no one cares." And it's like, well, I understand that, but maybe we owe people slightly better than the structure of the current GCSE.
Yeah.
And it's a tough one, because then what your typical science teacher will say to me is, we've got a hell of a lot of content to teach.
Yes, they're not
And
wrong.
it's true. It's really true. And I think that one of the things that I felt was kind of encouraging about the interim report from the Curriculum Review Committee was that they were aware of that, and that they were aware of, that if you stuff a curriculum with content, that nobody masters anything. And I'm hopeful that maybe we'll get and I don't know, I mean, you can tell me as a science specialist, but I'm hopeful that maybe we'll get a slightly more slimmed down
I think so.
science
And then
curriculum.
you could try to explain things in more detail. And I get the kind of thing, knowledge retrieval, big on whiteboards, lots
I
of.
love whiteboards, Tom.
Me too. I do as well. Check everyone's answers.
Yeah.
But even if you can, like a few, even then, and I think sometimes people overplay your capacity. You see 30 boards, you go, or 25, you go, okay, but if you're looking for exactly the same thing, you can scan. And
Yeah,
then
but that misses what you're doing. What are you doing when they're writing on their boards?
well,
So I
yeah,
I
yeah,
I know what at least half the class are going to hold up before they hold it up.
yeah.
And I think if you don't know that, then you're making your job really, really difficult. But
Oh,
it
yeah,
means, like, two things, I think, for me anyway. I've got to be behind them at that stage, looking over their shoulder, looking at what's going on. And
yeah.
I've got to have some mechanism for not forgetting what I'm observing. So I've got to have some note-taking ability, some way of outsourcing my mental capacity. So I know it gets a bit of flack in some quarters, but I am a complete convert to the clipboard, and I clipboard on a copy of the seating plan, and I'm just annotating it throughout the lesson.
Yeah. Otherwise, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think I'm also a big fan of like. I mean, I know it's all about time, and I do used to do this a fair bit, but you have to everything you advocate is always in the context of a diet of activities timed carefully and thought carefully about. And I'm very sympathetic to a teacher or a department who feels like we want to get more structured talk into our lessons, and we have a slide which says think, pair, share on it for this very specific question because it's something we plan to do. And that's for some of them, that's like a gateway into learning how to do it so that later they can do more what you said and be more spontaneous and weave it in with the other things. Because until they've done a kind of planned one, they're not doing it at all, and the children never speak. So it's
It
making
is I mean, it is really interesting because, definitely I can look back at myself in my early career, first couple of years teaching, and I was shocking. I was really bad. I was not a natural, if there's such a thing. And I would obsess about detail. I would write down timings. I would, they would always be off. I'd be, I'd be so focused on like what I wanted to happen that I didn't have the capacity to take notice of what was happening.
yeah,
And now I'm like the opposite of that. I don't really. I literally. I feel sort of 25 years into a teaching career. I feel like I can walk into a room and go, "That's what you need to learn. I know how to teach that.
mm,
I'm just going to see if you're learning it."
yeah,
And it's I remember Martin Robinson talking about in response to the 5 minute lesson plan, talking about the 52-year lesson plan.
yeah,
And it's like that, isn't it? You've got
yeah.
this
It is like that.
lifetime
Yeah.
of experience.
So it's so
Uh,
interesting. And one of the things I think is so interesting about experience over it becomes expertise, but there's sometimes you learn that, like going back to be boring about electricity, you learn that it doesn't matter if they really understand it, like voltage and current at this
right.
point. They probably won't really understand it for years.
Or gravity.
It's a
They don't understand
slow
gravity, Tom.
it's a slow feed, it's a slow drip. And if they can kind of have language which
Yeah.
kind of gets to grips with it, that's all right. But other things, if you haven't got that now, come on. It's like we need to get that because otherwise you can't really understand nearly anything else. It's sort of there are things which are a bit more foundational, and you worry more about them not knowing them yet.
What's
'Cause
say what things like transference of matter or
like for example, just understanding that
conservation of mass or something like that?
all let's say the concept of molecules is sort of
Okay.
things are made up of small things. It's like and how big they are in and just some mental model, some sense of that. Because otherwise,
Yeah.
chemistry is random facts and diagrams you're remembering off by heart. I remember a brilliant thing. Dylan Williams said this years ago. One of the first things I remember him saying was there was some study which they showed you molecules of water, and people were saying like a hydrogen and two hydrogens and an oxygen and molecule diagrams on their whiteboards. And then he said they tested them. Well, show me where's the water, and people were pointing to the white stuff, the white space around the
Ah,
molecules. So in other
ah,
words, even though they could produce the
yeah, yeah,
diagram
yeah,
which said
yeah,
water or oxygen, they didn't
yeah.
actually understand the diagram they were reproducing. It was just they were learning
No.
to reproduce
Well, it
it.
doesn't make intuitive sense, does it? I mean, the problem with science, the science that you teach in school, is that it flatly contradicts your experiences of the
It,
world.
and sometimes it's sort of it goes to like it's too abstract.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean,
One of my favorite? Can I just tell you this story?
yeah.
Favorite misconception. So I remember reading a study which was talking about science misconceptions, and they said that in it that one of the things that they had noticed was that when children are asked a question in a science lesson, there's a massive temptation or a massive instance of kids answering with carbon dioxide. And the likelihood that they're right seems quite high. So they say carbon dioxide, and it's like teachers like, "Yep, tick," but they say it randomly,
I say it randomly.
yeah, yeah, which is a wonderful idea.
I love that. That is very funny. It's funny like this, and this I think this is one of the things we sort of, in a general sense, I do think it's important to think about is when you're teaching is you need to be aware of all the pitfalls, all the
Oh
false
my God.
all the
Yeah.
false things, and checking, probing, finding out if they really know it, and having multiple tools. So this is why I find it odd when people don't value talk as one of them, even like because it's
Yeah.
it's such a powerful way of getting ideas to be shown to yourself as a person. Never mind, to the teacher. And this is one of the things that I know that want to touch on in this is I'm a big fan of Dylan Williams' 5 formative assessment strategies, or he does call them strategies, and one of them is students as owners of their own learning or resources for one another. And those two almost
Yeah.
get forgotten about. Like in a room of 30 people, if you train your students to check their own knowledge and each other's, you've got, and you can, with some, verification. So hearing yourself make an argument and have someone bounce back to you whether you got it right, or even just rehearsing it in your own head, but I don't think things are insignificant. And of course, as a teacher, you can't check that each person, 30 people, but you can do that with whiteboards and later in a test. But as one of the learning things on the way, did you get it right? Was your sentence as good as this? Did you include this, this, or this? And having heard it said, you can start thinking, oh no, I forgot to say that. But it's part of the practice, part of the learning. And that type of talk to me is hugely valuable.
Yeah. But I know you've read Graham Nuttall, and
Yeah.
in his wonderful book, The Hidden Lives of Learners, he talks about the fact that like most of what children learn is from each other, and most of it's wrong.
I know, but that's where I totally think that's true when it's not very well planned. But if it's something like, so here's one of my favorite things like I would recommend doing, and I used to do it a bit, and I would definitely do it a lot more now if I had my own class, is scaffolded talk and then scaffolds down. So for example, um, let's say you want to learn about, and I'm always using science examples, but it could
Of
be
course, I use English ones.
it could be something like, because I've seen this horribly, done like, oh come on. Let's say something. How does the respiratory system work? You breathe in, and with the diagrams fully labeled there, like no test, no remembering it, no guessing. You just look. You just go, okay. So the air comes through the nasal cavity, and it says it. You say it through the trachea, and you practicing down through
Yeah.
the
That's where choral response is good, isn't it?
that is good. But
Pronunciation.
then have a go, tell the story, follow it down. It's got a sort of linear kind of narrative to it. It has to go in an order. And then what happens when you breathe in and out? Okay, now do it without the labels. So you take the labels away and you say, do I know them? Like, okay, now you have to start saying, okay, so the air comes through
Through
and you're
that
telling the
thing.
story. But you're not just guessing and getting it wrong and learning it off your friend. You're practicing generating knowledge, and and then if you forget one, you just can go back and look it up to see, oh, I forgot that. Yeah, but it's
Yeah,
part
yeah.
of learning. And to me, that sort of talking, structured talking, it's different from having a debate about what Macbeth, Shakespeare meant for us to know about Macbeth, but it's using talk as a tool for checking your knowledge and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, why is the talk and the important bit of that?
Because I think you need to say words to kind of really own them.
Okay.
So if you some students, and I've
Yeah,
tested this
okay.
out, have got it's like knowing that the number on the bottom of a fraction is the denominator. You don't really know what it means because you
Yeah.
just point and go denominator. But if you have to kind of talk about
Yeah.
doing a maths operation and explain what you did and say, so the denominator must be this because, and you have to use it, it's a deeper understanding. And it's the same with
Right. It
knowing,
embeds it into the schema that
yeah,
you've got going
like,
on. Yeah.
and also just being able to be confident able to say alveolus out loud. I mean, a lot of students, what you find,
Yeah.
they'll just
Yeah.
say, I had this. I saw this in a lesson. It was quite funny. It really chuckled me actually. That this girl, they're talking about uh, hydraulic action in geography in coastal erosion. Hydraulic action. It said it written down, and she was
Yeah.
kept
Yeah.
do it. She was going. So the hydrochloric action, and I said, no, read it again to me. Hydrochloric action. And I said, no, take your time, follow it. Like, what is it? It doesn't say that, does it? And she went, oh God, no, it doesn't. Hydraulic. And it really made her have to think hard about that word because
Yeah.
and it was the verbalization of it. Otherwise, she'd just have like bypassed that.
Did she know what hydro signified?
I think they had done it before, like, but I don't think she knew at that moment. So
No.
I could have gone and broken it down for her.
Yeah.
But it's,
I mean, I definitely not quite the same as that, but I remember recently being in a science lesson and the teacher was talking about thermodynamic reactions or something like that. Well, I can't remember the detail, but I do remember saying to a kid, "What does thermodynamic mean?" And them saying, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, what about thermo? What does thermo? Don't know. What's the thermometer? Oh, it measures temperature. Right. Yeah. So it's a meter that measures temperature, therm. What's thermodynamic mean?" He went, "Oh, it's got something to do with temperature, hasn't it?" And that kind of thing, that kind of that science in particular is so full of those instances
yeah,
of helping children be able to make really educated guesses about really tricky words.
yeah,
And they're so, because you've got all that content to teach, you've you've got to you've got to move on, and you don't have
you have
time
to move on.
to,
They don't have practice. And sometimes, I mean, I've even been in French lessons where not everyone says all the
yeah,
words. And you think, come on, like, you either got to be really big on choral or have
yeah,
really good pair structures or something, because otherwise not everyone
or
practices,
both.
or both.
Yeah.
But,
So the minute somebody, like in the English curriculum that I led the development of, we start with Odysseus. So we have lots of year sevens talking about Odysseus, and they can't say Odysseus the first time they try. So you just spend a lot of time, like everybody, one, two, three, after me, Odysseus, and you just there is something cognitively sticky about saying things aloud. You're right. I think
yeah,
that's important. That if you've said a thing, I remember reading Isabel Beck's book, Bringing Words to Life, and her talking about the fact that, and I was really struck by this. I can even remember some of the figures that she used. That when you see a word in a piece of writing, there's a roundabout a 15% likelihood that you're likely to retain it. So, relatively low. And we've all had that experience of,
yeah,
"Oh, I've seen it before, but nope, it's gone." And she talks about the fact that when you've seen a word on three different occasions, the likelihood you'll retain the meaning rises to about 50%. But if you're doing explicit vocabulary instruction and you tell somebody what a word means and you get them to spell it and you get them to say it, so you code it and recode it, like decode and recode, the likelihood of retaining goes way, way up to above 80%.
yeah,
I remember being really, really struck by that idea that like the idea of saying things aloud is really, really powerful. And that's, just to sort of circle back. And I think that's one of the, the I, I feel that with Pair Talk, I really want to make it short and snappy because I always want to bring it back to me scaffolding what their idea is. Like, it's really great that I check their understanding by them using their everyday language and putting it in their own terms and going, yeah, I think it means this. And then it's like, okay, well, now we need to recode that. We need to put it back into the structures, and then we're going to practice saying the thing
yeah.
so
I
that
think
you become fluent in the thing rather than your like
your
not.
own version of it.
Yeah,
And that's why I think you need to hit sample. So one of the things I would do in a lesson is here, let's say I ask you to explain, I don't know, a phenomenon that I was teaching you about or a maths problem. And I heard yours and I heard someone else's. And this is what I think I find so interesting about the talk responses is they're never the same. And often, in fact,
yeah,
nearly always, the subtle differences are really significant. You think, oh, that's
right.
interesting. You use that word and use that word. Are they the same? And sometimes they're not. And you think, okay, that's not quite the right meaning of that word. And but that is a bit more sharp, or that's a better way of expressing it, or we can discuss that. And it's the differences, you sort of weigh them up. Like one of my favorite things that Martin Robinson taught me in a masterclass thing he did was when the value of comparison. Like if you look at
Yeah,
one picture, if you look at a
yeah,
painting, you might appreciate it. But when
yeah,
you
yeah,
put
yeah,
it next to another one, which could be similar or just very contrasted, you learn more about both of them in
yeah.
contrast. That one, oh, I see that, and it's the same
I
with.
saw him do that talk the very first time.
Oh, really?
Two, four people, Robert and Elizabeth Björk,
Oh my gosh!
and like on a little lecture on interleaving. And Bob Bjork came up to him afterwards and said, "That's the best explanation of interleaving I've ever seen."
Wow, amazing.
I
And
know, I know. Yeah.
And I do think that's interesting. So even I test this more of my most of my work with adults, so that an adult will try an explanation of something, and then another one will say, "That's so interesting that you use that word and you said this," and like they might be saying something quite poetic about the sun coming up. They say, the sun just appears slowly over the horizon," or someone will say,
Or peeps out, or
or peeps out, or pops up, or um, suddenly we notice it and it wasn't there before. And you think all of you are describing the same thing, but entirely different ways. And it's sort of that's your model. That's what you have in your
yeah,
head, and that's what I'm finding out from you. And I can't think of a better way
yeah.
of
No,
discovering.
that's a really nice way of putting it, because I think in those terms, what I'm trying to do is build a route from your model to the thing,
Yeah, yeah,
so that you've all got slightly different pathways there, and it's going to trigger different things within your own sort of conception of what we're studying. But you've all got a
yeah,
well-trodden route back to the explanation and the language that we need to be able to use to be able to look clever, essentially, and sort of impress
yeah,
people
yeah.
with the depth
So,
of our.
so that's only, and I do think in English, I feel like that need for like stringing. I've that in a lot of English lessons as a non-specialist and gone, why don't you just tell them the answer? Because they don't know. They don't know the
No.
meaning of that sentence or what the poet meant there. They need some options at least. Give them some options.
Yeah.
Give them some
Well,
choices because
you know,
they're guessing wildly and they
Well,
don't
you're
know.
asking the wrong person here, but Tom, because obviously I agree with you to a
Yeah,
large extent. But you're not going to be surprised to hear there's a large body of English teachers that think it's really, really important to give children that opportunity of responding to the text without that being infected by the teacher's explanation. And
yeah,
it's not that I think that's wrong. I think in a perfect world, that's right. And the reason I agree with you that I think you have to just tell them something is because the the children who are least likely to be able to articulate anything meaningful tend to be the most disadvantaged students that you teach.
yeah,
The students who are most able to do it are the ones that have the wherewithal to do it, despite the fact you haven't taught them.
yeah,
And that if you're interested in equity and social justice, that it's really, really important to try and level that playing field a little bit by giving everybody at least. I mean, one of the things that I often do with, something like a poem is I'll tell them something like, this is one interpretation. Okay. In a moment, I'm going to give you another one, which is completely different.
all
So,
right.
but so I want you to know this one, and I want you to be able to articulate this one, but then I'm going to destroy that with somebody. And like some of you will be tempted to go, "Oh, that first thing was wrong and the second thing's right," or the other way round. But they're both right. It's the process of making the argument in a
Yeah,
convincing way which makes it right, not. And that's, especially for that stereotypical student that likes certainty, likes science, likes maths, likes the right
yeah.
answer. That's
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 that.
that's a tough game to play.
It is, and I feel like there's something about concrete experience or sort of an original thought and so on, but it has to be scaffolding for success. And the best bet is, and I find I still need to make this case all the time. Let them be successful with all the help you can give them and lots of scaffolds, and then see if they can apply that knowledge more independently to something new or with slightly less help or whatever. But don't just go to that
Yeah.
one first and
Success has to come first, always.
puzzle it out.
Yeah.
It's painful to see those lessons still occasionally,
Yeah.
or where just
Well, I
still
find, I
left out the
find,
whole thing.
I find, and I don't know whether you'd agree with this, Tom. I find I very rarely see that as a whole lesson,
Yeah, it's
but I
true.
regularly see elements of that in most of the lessons I see,
Mm.
where there's a little bit of just guess, there's a little bit of let's find out what you already know, let's let's privilege the people who are most privileged.
Yeah,
And no one, of course, nobody's doing that deliberately. No one's doing that thinking, oh, um, I'm gonna sort of make the kids that come from the local estate feel really bad about themselves. Like nobody would ever do that. But it's a kind of byproduct of doing that without really thinking through the consequences of getting kids to do things that you've not taught them how to do.
No, I agree, and that's where I guess I read this into a lot of the critique that people have, or the anxiety, and people sort of saying, "No more oracy, don't bang on about oracy," because they're worried that it's distraction from that process. And my feeling,
Yeah.
if you use talk in a very disciplined and structured way to
Well,
enforce knowledge, it does
let's
the opposite.
let's talk for a moment, Tom. I mean, I'm sure you've seen Pratesh at Arxone do his lesson,
Yeah,
the
I have,
step
yeah,
up
yeah.
sort, and it's obviously it's incredible, and I think what I love about it is it shows where you can put the bar. That if you've got an amazing culture and you've really trained the students in your expectations, that's possible. And I think, I was talking to a teacher, a friend of ours, the other day, and she was talking about the fact that she'd seen that, and it had really inspired her. And she was like, "I just didn't know that was possible, and now that I know that you can do that, that's changed everything," and that's fantastic. And I've spoken to other people who've seen that and gone, predictably perhaps, but where would I even start?
Well,
How,
yeah,
how could I do that with our kids? And I mean, that's one of the reasons that I do the thing that I do of saying, well, let me show you with your class. Like, I'll just
yeah.
pitch up. They don't know me. I'll have a go at it, and then we'll discuss whether or not they can do it and what you might need to change to try and get there.
Well, I find like so. One of the things I'm just blows my mind is like even with I think a fairly doable thing like choral response. I've met a lot of teachers who are just feel embarrassed by it. They can't do it.
Right.
They're like,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing with me. So for example, like all hands up. And I maybe I taught for too long. I taught for my whole
Yeah.
teaching career, never did that once. And I feel
Yeah.
like maybe it's so alien to me that the idea I go
Yeah.
to class and I would feel like I was pretending to be somebody else.
Yeah.
So it's not
Yeah.
the issue with our kids can't do it. I can't do it.
Yeah. That's so true, Tom. I
So I
think
feel like I have to.
something in there.
Most of the teachers I meet are never going to teach like Pritesh, and they just never are. I mean, it's just de facto the fact. It would take them so long to get that point. So I'm thinking, what they're like, this is where they are now, as them. You can do this, and you could do it. And they think, pair, share, simple old think, pair, share, and no hands up cold calling is easier to do for them than
Yeah.
all hands up, which feels like the bar's there, but it's
Right. Right.
another planet of
Yeah.
acting.
I do know what you mean. I remember years ago, uh, going to King Solomon Academy, and when it was the top performing school that year, and having spending the day there, and things like it's like silent corridors. I just never imagined that was possible. I was like, bloody hell, like okay.
Yeah,
But also, some of the things that they did, like they did instead of clapping, they did clicking
yeah,
to show appreciation. And part of it, and I was reflecting on this at the time, sort of part of it is in group, out group stuff, that I'm the out group and I'm meant, not deliberately, but like I'm meant to feel a bit awkward. They're meant to feel included and special, and we're doing something that makes
yeah.
us
Yeah, I
unified.
think that's right.
And you're over there. And so Pratesh building that culture with his class where they're all like, yeah, I'm putting my hand up,
Yeah,
because
it's amazing.
that's the
But,
vibe.
but I feel like you have to.
That doesn't happen by accident, does it?
No, it doesn't. But I feel like it's important to sort of see that it's a one method. It's with a particular character, and there are some things I wouldn't do. So I always think like there are some things I wouldn't do, even though I see them being effective by others,
Yeah.
because I just don't feel comfortable. So I think I know that's true for me. So I have to respect that when other people say it and think, okay, so let's
There's a
work out.
challenge there, though, isn't there?
There is a challenge.
That
I
an
have to
awful.
believe it's
So
better.
tell me what you think. Tell me your response to this. I think an awful lot of decisions in schools are made for adults' convenience rather than children's benefit.
I think that's true. That's partly true. But on the other hand, this is the other thing I think is that the teachers are the teachers we have, and they're
Yeah.
valuable, and that's
Yeah,
not
of course.
that's an important bit of it. So
Yeah.
the reason people like being teachers is because they can kind of be themselves, and we have to when we're trying to do the best,
Yeah. No, no,
we have
true.
to sort of work that in somehow. And
No,
I
you're
listen to various
absolutely right. I
teachers
think
who
you can. so I look at that lesson that's filmed, and I would feel similarly about some of the things as well. I'm not like a natural all hands upper because it's kind of slightly outside my comfort zone, and I don't think you have to. There is no. That's the personality you need to be a teacher.
No,
I think the important bit is, with I think what is important is saying to a teacher, what you can't do is to say, my teacher persona precludes children from talking.
no, exactly.
You know,
Yeah,
how you do it and how you find your way into it, there's room for many, many approaches, and there's room for your personality to. One of the most effective teachers I ever worked with was really quiet and really, in some ways, if I was being sort of super critical, really quite flat and really sort of quite distant. And the kids just leaned into it. I mean, she had some magic, and it was completely different to my teacher persona. But I
yeah,
would, and so like if you were to watch a film of just her, you'd think, oh my goodness. But you watch the reaction of a class with her,
yeah,
and the alchemy made it
yeah.
amazing.
I totally agree with that. And sometimes you can't bottle that. I mean, I just can think of people just like going through a mind of really charismatic teachers who you think the problem with that is like that's not transferable. That's them, and they get
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes that
Yes, I mean
and I
that.
feel like you need you. But even then, this is what I find that's so interesting about the precision of techniques and stuff. Is that even in a presence of a charismatic, energetic, creative teacher, they can sometimes be so full of that performance type persona that they don't notice little details
No,
like all the children talking or
yeah,
thinking.
yeah, for sure.
And so you still have to think, is it am I reaching everybody? Is everyone learning from me? And there are some universal things which, as long as you're checking against those things, you can teach in a variety of ways.
I do think what's useful about the way Pratesh's lesson works is that he hasn't got a dominant personality. He isn't, or he doesn't appear to me. It's all very much like it's quite businesslike.
Yeah, it is. It's very procedural.
Um, yeah, and I don't mean that in a critical way. It's just this is what we're doing. Now we're doing this. Now we're doing this. You're doing that. You're doing this. I want that. Well done. All of that, and it isn't one of those superstars who gets up and plays the guitar and
No,
does backflips and
and
stands on a table and says, "Oh, captain, my captain." There's none of that.
but I remember once working in a school where the languages department was in a pretty poor state, and literally the teacher was almost talking about French like it was another. She was saying, "Well, sometimes people in French, what they sometimes say is this," and she was speaking the whole time in English, and it was just so weird.
Yeah,
And I was literally as a non-specialist saying to her, like, a lot of French teachers they start the lesson it's bonjour,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
vous, and they talk about it, and they talk
They're
about il
trying to
faut.
normalize the.
Kids can pick it up, and they know all these
Yeah,
instructions, and they can.
yeah,
And I said, so I actually asked one, I won't name names or anything, but a teacher at Michaela, who I'd watched teach languages, a woman, and it was one of the best lessons I've ever seen in my life. And she said, well, should I just film the first 10 minutes of my lesson? And so she put an iPhone at the back of the class and she sent me a video of the first 10 minutes of her lesson. And it was for my eyes only, so she don't share
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
I shared it with this teacher. I told her who it was for. When I showed it to the teacher, she just burst into tears. She just said, oh my God, like that's that's just unbelievable. I said, look, they speak French all the time, and they speak more French in 10 minutes than I didn't say this to her, but literally than your kids do in a week or a
Yeah.
month.
Or
Like
yeah,
it's ba 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 da 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 sing
and it's learned
song
routines.
routines.
It's practice.
Just unbelievable. And
Yeah.
they were enjoying it. That's the thing.
Everyone enjoys being successful.
Yeah, they were enjoying it.
I
So
remember once watching a French lesson, Tom, where this boy put his hand up and said, "Miss, is French a prank?"
I could check.
And it's like,
Yeah,
he's never been to France. He's never going to go to France. He's never heard anyone speaking French except in that room. And it just is like,
yeah.
really?
I know it's tragic. But that was an example of presenting someone with a kind of almost unattainable kind of for her it felt like unattainable. But I said, let's break it down.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's there's a bit of a story they've learnt off by heart, and she teaches it to them, and they can say it back and forward. They know the lines of the dialogue. I say this bit, you say that bit, and it's got structures in it.
Mm-hmm.
They've learnt them, and they can
And there's
practice
a rhythm.
and listen to their accent.
Yeah.
She's saying, "Come on," but she can, because they know the words, they can then focus on the accent, and they've done that story. It gets longer and longer every week, and they know it and they then just deconstruct it afterwards. But that first 5, 10 minutes of the lesson is total consolidation, confidence building. Look at the fun they
Joy.
have, joy, and like that. You deconstruct that and say that's learnable. It's everyone's doing it, everyone's learning it.
Yeah.
It's nothing hard. What's hard about that is having the personality to do it, but it starts with
Well,
having the intention to do it.
I mean, I think that how languages are taught at Michaela is not about personality, because I've seen a couple of different languages teachers teach there, and they use that method regardless of their teacher persona,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
that's what I think should give us confidence that anybody could, with the support and the belief, anybody could perhaps replicate that. I don't know whether that's true. I'm not a language teacher, but I do think, that idea of replicability is really, really important. I remember, about 15 years ago, working at a school where, at the beginning of when the trainees arrived, whenever that was in the school year, like October or something, and they'd be taken on a tour, all like NQTs, all the rest of it. They'd be taken on this tour of like the of various classrooms in the school, and I was on the tour, and they'd come into my. I remember them in this particular year coming into my year 11 lesson. So it was a class that I'd taught for over a year, and they just watched me do something that, like, the joins were invisible. I knew the kids really, really well. The routines were down to a T. I knew exactly what I was doing with them, and I was just reflecting on the fact that they've come in to watch somebody doing something which is mystifying.
Yeah.
Like how, and like that they could see. I mean, I'm sure, they could see it was good, but they didn't learn anything. They
No,
couldn't learn anything because they couldn't see the joins, and the joins, the how you fit things together
yeah, that's so interesting.
and the struggle.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things to do in a training thing, we have all our little techniques, but they is to deconstruct something like a class discussion. So let's have a look at a class discussion. It involves it a signal for attention. It's got a bit of cold calling, think, pair, share, uh, vocab development. It's got learning objectives. It's got all sorts of little things are going on, and then when you do it, it feels artful, but it's
Mm.
actually very technical. You've got, if you're thinking and you're checking, you've got to be thinking who's with me now, and there's a
But
lot of
there's,
components to it which seem that. So when people
but I
say,
think you say it's technical. I think it's like one of those things where really experienced expert teachers forget how they learned it.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
It's like any degree of expertise. It's really, that not one of those novice expert gaps is that it's really hard for experts to remember what it was like not to be able to do the thing they're really good at.
No, I think you're right. And sometimes people forget, like there's such embedded habits. Like they've created this sort of veneer of surface on the feeling that they're doing something. But actually,
Yeah,
like it could be a teacher who's answering all their
yeah,
questions, or they say something like, "So, David, do you think what Shakespeare said about Macbeth was
yeah,
suggest that he's evil?" Yes. Well, exactly. And so, well, maybe he does. And then the students has just said evil or yes, and
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah,
goes
yeah.
on and on. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
ask someone else who then says,
No, I know.
"Well, you're right.
Very common.
I
Very
didn't
common.
so, and yet to reflect that back to someone and say, look, you almost feel like you're critiquing their entire identity, but you have to say
Yeah,
some of the answers the students gave
yeah.
were this. Did you notice that?
They're
And
playing a game with you. They're like, this is the transaction. And one of the things I sometimes find with schools is where, turnaround schools where they go in and they sort out behaviour, and I've seen schools that where behaviour's been awful, and they've come around, they've made a new set of people have taken it over, and they've blasted it, and behaviour's like amazing after 2 weeks. But the ratcheting up of what to do in lessons once behaviour sorted
mm,
just lags. It lags behind
yeah,
that. It's
it's
hard.
mad.
It's harder. And so, it's quite common to see teachers who are like, oh God, this used to take me an hour, but now it takes 10 minutes. Like, what am I going to do? And 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 I think that one of the things that I notice with kids in particular is like, look, I'm behaving. My part of the transaction is I'm not mucking about, I'm not swearing, I'm not like doing the things that I was doing.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly.
And they don't, and like
Told you what.
when you say, so now I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to insist that you participate in a really polite, respectful way. They're like, hang on a second, that doesn't happen, and
Yeah.
it's hard for them to acquire that culture.
No, I agree. And that is the whole thing. So the purpose of behavior is so that you can do things.
Yeah,
But this is why I feel like I want to, I feel like I'm a bit of a boring middle path type person, but I feel like there's the people who are sort of will say annoy things that annoy me, like eye rolly, oh, Tom, look, there's so much more to see than think, pair, share. Like, for God's sake. And I'm thinking, no, look, trust me, most schools I go to,
yeah, yeah,
solid think pair share would be a giant win. Like,
yeah.
don't diminish it, please. Don't diminish it, please, because it sounds like. And then there's the other side, which is it's a waste of time because it's too hard, and I just need to teach this, and
Yeah.
it's are better. And it's like, no, it's not that hard, and if you do it well, it's really powerful, and it's really sort of if everyone could do just make sure everyone was talking when you asked them to talk and
The thing that you said a moment ago, I
away.
think, is the key, that the purpose of the behavior is so that you can do stuff.
Exactly.
And I think there are schools which feel that the win they've made of behavior is really, really fragile. And if they ask the kids to do interesting stuff, then that does fall apart. And so they don't do it. And in some cases, they tell teachers they can't do it. And I've definitely come across that.
Yeah.
And, like kids not being in rows or not in their seats is just not allowed. You can't get them up and doing a thing, which I wouldn't do a lot of, but, I'd want the flexibility to, make a professional judgment. And I'd certainly want to do it in some subjects. And so when you have like a drama teacher told you can do drama, but they have to be in their seats, is is an interesting is an interesting thing. And they're not doing it because they're being mean or they're being, it's because it's fragile. It's
Yeah,
but
that's
the
right.
danger is, unless you're thinking always, why are we making the kids behave? It's not for the sake of them behaving, although that's important too. It's so that we can do drama with them.
Yeah, it's true. I've also think there's a case for say you can teach maths really well without discussion.
Yeah.
You can because there's been practice and it's more of a and I've seen good teachers who don't think pair share or talking about maths in maths lessons is essentially important enough. And I would argue against that, having taught maths as well. But I understand their perspective. Had a discussion recently with a teacher who was a DT teacher who said that she thought making everyone work on think pair share was annoying because she said no, they're in the middle of making their things. And I
Mm.
sort of laughed and said, but you're not supposed to sort of pull them away from the practice bench and then
Yeah.
yeah, it would be
Well,
like when would you use it? It might be when you're looking at
yeah.
some work and saying, why is that one more effective than that? And they could all
But it's
discuss.
such a revealing comment there, because I think that teachers feel, if even if they haven't been explicitly told this, they feel that there's an explanation that they have to do the initiative.
Yeah, yeah,
So
exactly.
so oracy is like a big. It's like I was saying at the beginning, there are people that like, why did you do turn and talk there? Because that's, we have to do one.
We have to do one. Yeah,
And that's the worst of all reasons for doing
it
one.
is. It is the worst.
Because they've, nobody's got any a clue why it's happening, and it could be made instantly better by just having a purpose,
Yeah,
having a rationale for what it is you want to achieve. And um, that DT teacher saying that, I really sympathize with.
yeah.
Like, it's I've come across PE teachers saying we've got to take our exercise books out onto the field so they can do some writing in their PE lesson, or music teachers going, yeah, we've got to do, like, in the name of literacy, we can't do any music. And it's not as rare as you'd imagine.
No, and I also, I mean, I have huge
You've got to
sympathy.
respect the subject.
Totally. I mean, I've seen some mad whole school initiatives which
Yeah,
are totally inappropriate for subjects, like some knowledge quizzing in art and PE. Like, for God's sake, they barely have enough time as it is. And like,
yeah, yeah,
and getting them out of the field by the time we're there, in a natural PE coaching scenario, you don't need to get them all like doing a turn and talk. It's not the most important thing. You just don't.
no. I
But
mean,
anyway,
like some of the best modeling I see is in PE or DT or something like that. That's
I think the thing is like for one I often use PE examples because they can do something visually that other teachers don't have the opportunity to. When you're
yeah,
looking along a line of people, or like you got
yeah,
15 pairs of students on all the badminton nets, and they're all practicing. Every single student is practicing. You stand and look and go, okay, are they getting it? You don't have to go and ask them. You can see it just visually, and you can see details. You're trying to get to that by in a talk-based subject, but
yeah,
you have to have other ways of revealing
yeah,
that thing, and that's PE teachers have that advantage,
yeah, absolutely.
which and so they don't need to do the other thing. So you have to think what's the most useful
Yeah.
thing.
Why make them do the thing that they don't need to do?
And whenever I say these things in whole staff CPD, like, you can see the PE teachers like,
Yeah, well, it's important.
making me do stuff I don't need to do.
Yeah. People need to say it.
They do. We
Tom,
should
I
stop.
recognize I've taken up a lot more of your
Uh,
time than you
This has
expected.
been fun. I think people enjoy listening to it.
I
Two
hope so, but
whittering on
I've really
about.
enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, me too. Well, let's do another one another time.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Well, thanks, David. Great to chat to you.
Great to talk to you too, Tom, and enjoy China.
Well, and you too. Have fun in Beijing.
Bye.
Bye.